All right, well, thank you everyone for joining us for today's webinar on the overview of the SBIR STTR program, how you can get funded to develop your idea. So a little bit about the SBDC. So we are a nonprofit organization. We provide confidential, no-cost advising and training services for small businesses. We're funded by the SBA, and our host is Cal Poly Humboldt. We're also funded by the state of California. And then here are some of our experts. We have some local experts here that serve our center here in Shasta and Trinity County. And then we also have additional access to some regional advisors in the North State. So they specialize in a lot of different business specialties for businesses. So usually have an advisor who can answer questions. And like I said, it's no cost to you. So here's some of the things that we've achieved in the past couple of years. So help businesses get funding, loans, help created jobs, new business starts, etc. And again, we serve Shasta and Trinity counties from our center. So there are other SBDC centers. So if you're outside of this area, there's going to be a local center, other places in the U.S. that should service your area. Before we get started, I do have to read this disclaimer. So I'll go ahead and do that. So the information provided in this webinar and any supplementary materials provided to registrants are intended for educational and informational purposes only and does not constitute professional, financial, or legal advice. No registrant should act or fail to act on the basis of any material contained in this webinar without obtaining proper financial, legal, or other professional advice specific to their situation. The Northern California Small Business Development Center and its host, the Cal Poly Humboldt Sponsored Programs Foundation, specifically disclaims any liability, loss, or risk, personal or otherwise, which is incurred as a consequence, directly or indirectly, of the use and application of any of the information presented in this webinar. All right, and then I will hand it over to our presenter, David Walker.
Thank you. That was Emily Christensen. Emily is the person who runs the office here in Shasta County for the SBDC. I'm a guy that has a lot of experience with the SBIR STTR program with multiple agencies. And so I think I know enough to be able to provide a little introduction to it and possibly help you understand whether or not it makes sense for what you're doing as a small business owner and innovator. So let's get going. Our agenda is going to be an introduction on the program itself, how it works, some things to think about, and some tips before you start off on this little SBIR adventure if you decide to do it. And then we'll wrap things up. If you have any questions along the way, type them in the chat. Emily will interrupt me if she feels it's appropriate. Otherwise, we'll get to them at the end. And we'll just see how it goes. I don't think there's very many people on this particular call. So yeah, we should be able to get through this and get all the questions answered without any problem. We're here for up to an hour. So let's see what we can get through and get it going. A quick introduction. I assume you've heard of some of these companies: Symantec, Qualcomm, 23andMe. I found out recently Sonicare is one of these companies, and iRobot is one of these companies. What they have in common is that they've all started out with SBIR money. SBIR is a government program, stands for Small Business Innovation Research. There's a sister program associated with it called Small Business Technology Transfer, STTR. For the purposes of clarity, we're just going to call everything SBIR, generally speaking, through the rest of the presentation. But the idea of the program is fairly simple. It's a federal government program that'll provide either a grant or a contract to a small business that will develop an innovative technology that meets a federal need, has a market opportunity, and has some element of technical risk. And we'll talk about what those mean. So to simplify it, the company has a novel and innovative product or solution that fulfills an agency or public need. If that is the case, it may qualify for an SBIR award. SBIR is a program that's been around for quite a while. In fiscal year 2018, I don't have this updated for later years because I haven't seen the data yet, but they put out, they being government agencies, put out $3.6 billion across all the agencies in a form of either a grant or a contract to small businesses to help them with ideas and innovative concepts that they had to either sell them to the agencies and or to the market. These are the different agencies that participate. The 5 big ones are the Department of Defense, Health and Human Services, the Department of Energy, the National Science Foundation, and NASA. There are 6 other agencies that combined for the rest of this pie, this 3.6 billion that in fiscal year 18 went to different small businesses. And we're gonna look at these a little closer. The bottom line is, if a federal agency has a research and development budget that exceeds $100 million, by law, they have to have an SBIR program. They have to spend a small percentage of that on grants or contracts to small businesses for them to develop their technologies. SBIR breaks down that 3.6 billion that we saw on the last slide, breaks down to 3.2 billion for SBIR and 450 million for STTR. They make they make more than 5,000 awards every year. Through 2019, over the years, $54.3 billion and 179,000 awards had been made to small businesses. Through about 2017, there were about 70,000 issued patents, over 1.5 million people employed with SBIR firms. And this was this last one was a quote I just saw a couple of weeks ago, very recently anyway. According to a study by the Department of Defense, the federal government has seen a 22-to-1 return for every federal dollar spent in the SBIR program. Not 100% sure how they calculate that, but the idea that I've heard bandied about in the SBIR program over the years is that if the US government can use these grants and these contracts to make businesses successful and to get those businesses growing, then the idea is the businesses make money and return that money to the government in the form of tax dollars. And so what the DoD is trying to say here is that they're seeing a 22-to-1 return. Thought that was an interesting stat. Someday I'm going to delve into it when I get really bored. A little bit more of a background. This started out, this is not a new program. It started out under President Carter as a pilot program in 1977. Reagan signed it into law as a federal-wide program in 1982. There are, at the moment, 11 federal agencies with the R&D budgets over 100 million that must participate in the program. And I list them here: agriculture, commerce, defense. Defense is by far the biggest. Education, energy is another big one. Health and Human Services is a big one. Homeland Security, transportation, the EPA, NASA, and the National Science Foundation. The goals of the program, again, are to meet a federal R&D need, to increase private sector commercializations of innovations from federal R&D funds, stimulate technological innovation, and foster and encourage innovation and foster tech transfer. That's the idea, and that's what Congress votes on when they reauthorize the program. The program, by the way, is up for reauthorization this year. The last time it was authorized was, I think, in 2016, and it was authorized through 2022. And Congress is supposed to be reauthorizing it now. The last I heard was that the House had approved it for 2023, and we have not heard yet whether or not the Senate um, is approving it. I'm told that we have a request that I have my camera on. The reason I don't have my camera on is twofold. One, I don't want to scare you, and two, it's not working well. But I can do it real quick. You got to stop sharing if you're that interested. Let's see. Hang on a second. There you go. We'll start sharing again. And there it is. The camera's on. Let's see. So we'll go to the next. I'm going to have some examples here of companies that have had successful SBIR programs. These are just some examples of what you may or may not be able to accomplish for yourself, perhaps. Some SBIR success stories that are published at sbir.gov. By the way, that's a good website to go to, sbir.gov, if you want information on the SBIR program. That's the key website. Whole Trees was a Department of Agriculture program that developed a new market for small diameter round timber that got 1.6 million in SBIR money. Green Heron Tools developed an ergonomically friendly gardening tools. The idea was that the gardening tools would be able to fit in everybody's hands, and not just people with large hands, but maybe people with smaller hands as well, but ergonomically friendly. And they received SBIR awards. The 3C Institute put together a program called Zoo U, which was an interactive social tutoring system that helped with bullying and a few other things. And they've gotten a number of SBIR grants and contracts over the years between the Department of Education and Health and Human Services. As you can see, they've totaled, if I added correctly, they totaled about $42 million in SBIR over 16 years to develop their different programs and their different products. The Department of Energy and the Department of Defense helped Colstra. One of the things Colstra did was developed what they call a self-healing internet. If you're interested in that, you might want to look at it. It's kind of interesting. From the two agencies, they've been able to get almost 6 million. BH Sensors is a Department of Defense SBIR awardee. They've gotten just under 6 million in funding. Quest from NASA and the National Science Foundation created one of their most interesting things, at least that I saw. They had insulation, a special kind of insulation that worked really, really well in rockets for NASA. I imagine there's potential applications in building materials and that sort of thing as well. My favorite, for a lot of reasons, is Blue River Technology. These guys were down in the Central California area, Stanford University graduates that started thinking about agriculture in that area and started thinking, gee, if you had a tractor that was going across a field, wouldn't it be great if, rather than spraying a bunch of herbicide all over the field, if the tractor could identify weeds that were coming up, differentiate those from the actual crops, and then as the tractor went over, spritz some herbicide right directly on the weed. That would save money on herbicide. It would save the nastiness of the herbicide over the field, and really be quite a cool thing. They got about $650,000 in SBIR money from the National Science Foundation, and before they fully developed the technology, they were bought out by John Deere for $305 million. They're an amazing success story, and you can read about them. Blue River Technology. You can Google them and read about them. So let's talk a little bit about how it works. SBIR is a 3-phase program. Phase one, the agency will give you up to about $275,000. It varies widely between the agencies. Some agencies will only be 75 or 100,000. Some will be a lot more. The cap for the National Science Foundation is 275. I don't know if there's another agency that's offering higher than that right now. There may be, but generally speaking, it's a 6 to 12 month program for you to prove the concept of what it is you're proposing to do. If you're successful, oh, by the way, the award rate varies widely by agency as well. It also varies widely year to year. But last I heard with the National Science Foundation, they were awarding about 1 in 8 proposals. I've heard from other agencies 1 in 10, 1 in 12, but overall, you know, the award rate seems to maintain itself right around that area. If you're successful with phase one, you can apply for phase two. Phase two is usually for prototype development, depending on where you're at. Sometimes it's to bring the product to full commercialization, but depending on the agency, you can get anywhere up to about 1.68 million. There are some agencies offer supplemental programs where the amount can go even higher. It's usually for a 2-year program. In fact, I think all of them are 2-year programs. And the award rates are higher because you're coming from a smaller pool. Almost always, there are a couple of exceptions, but almost always, in order to get phase two, you have to go through phase one. There are some exceptions. There's a couple of programs where they have, with a couple of agencies, where they'll have a direct to phase two. But vast majority of the agencies, vast majority of the programs, you have to go phase one and then phase two. There is a phase three. Phase three doesn't provide any actual SBIR money, but if you're proposing to, like, the Department of Defense, for instance, phase three would consist of a contract from them for you to provide the goods or the products that you developed during phase one and phase two. It would become a contract for you to provide those to the Department of Defense. That would be what phase three is. It's the commercialization of your product. So what does SBIR fund? They fund innovations, that's the I in SBIR, and they fund research that leads to these proof of concepts or technical feasibility. Each agency will have different areas that they're interested in. The Department of Energy will have specific topics that they'll be interested in funding, like maybe a new, dating myself, maybe a new solar panel, maybe a new battery, maybe a new energy storage device. The Department of Defense might be looking for some kind of new weaponry or shielding or who knows what, but they're going to have specific things that the agencies are in need of. The Department of Education will be looking for innovations in education. The EPA will be looking for ways to protect the environment and innovations related to that. So each agency will have different ideas, different topics that they'll be looking for. But the commonality is that they're going to want them all to have some level of commercial potential. And depending on the agency, they're going to put a higher or not as high emphasis on an idea called technical risk, which is that there's some risk that the idea you have may not work. If your idea is a slam dunk and it's going to work, the general feeling among the agencies that I've heard anyway is that why should they fund it? You could go get funding from a private investor or get a loan from a bank or something like that. So they want there to be some unanswered questions, some reason why you're not going to the market and getting it funded privately. And those are the general criteria for what SBIR funds. In order to be part of the program, your small business has to be owned by at least 50% American, US individuals, and independently operated. You have to have under 500 employees, which is generally speaking not a problem. for most businesses anyway. If you're small, you're going to have less than 500 employees. You have to be a for-profit. Nonprofits don't work for this. The work has to be done in the United States. You can't farm it out. That work that the SBIR is paying for has to be done within the United States. You can't send it overseas. And the focus is on performing research and development. So it's not just for purchasing equipment. It's not for commercializing technology that's already been developed. If you've already come a long ways and you've got a prototype and all you need is a little bit of help to get it to manufacturing, generally speaking, this isn't going to be your program. I say generally speaking because there's always exceptions, but generally speaking, more often than not, SBIR won't be for you. And if you have a technology that's very low risk and that all you really are looking for is capital, SBIR is probably not for you. So that's the qualifications for working with SBIR. Now I mentioned STTR. The difference between the two is that with SBIR, it's okay for you to work with a nonprofit research institution like a university or a national lab, something like that. With STTR, it's a requirement. You have to work with a university or a national lab. And there are specific guidelines to how much the national lab or the university will get and how much the small business will get in the division of labor for working on the grant or the contract. So there are rules regarding SBIR and STTR that you have to apply, that you have to adhere to. With STTR, you have to have the research institution as part of it, but the small business is always the applicant and always the awardee. It's up to the small business to implement the grant or the contract, and the small business is the one that answers to the government. They're the ones that oversee the grant or the contract. These are the agencies that work with SBIR and STTR. Notice that they're the same 5 agencies that have the biggest amounts for SBIR and STTR. Department of Defense, Health and Human Services, NASA, Energy, and the National Science Foundation. They'll do SBIR and STTR. The rest of them, EPA, Homeland, Education, Transportation, Commerce, and Agriculture, they do SBIR only. And when you're thinking about, gee, maybe my idea sounds like it might be good for one of these, don't necessarily judge an agency by its name. I'll give you an example. If you have, say, a new battery technology, a new way to store energy, that might be great for the Department of Energy. It might also be great for the Department of Transportation. NASA might have an interest in it. The National Science Foundation would have an interest in it. Department of Defense might also. And it's okay to apply to all of them at the same time. You just can't get an award for the same thing from all of them, from more than one. If you can apply to as many as you want, as many as may make sense, but you can only accept one award for the same work. So a little more about the program. The funding, as we said, is either going to be a grant or a contract. There's no loan to pay back. They don't take any equity. It's non-dilutive. The company will own the intellectual property. You own the intellectual property that you develop, whatever patent or trade secret you might develop. The government, however, will retain march-in rights. In other words, the way that works is, let's say you develop something for the Department of Defense, and they pay for your phase 1, they pay for your phase 2, and they're ready to give you a contract to deliver these products to them. If you refuse to do that, the government would have the right to march in, technically, take the technology and have it developed somewhere else so that they can get the products that they paid for. They would have that right in that scenario. And that's what march-in rights are. I have never heard of it ever happening, for sure. I've heard a rumor of it, but I've never heard that it's actually happened. I've mentioned in these webinars before, I have heard a rumor of one time when it did happen with the Department of Defense, but I don't know, 5,000 some odd awards a year, and one rumor of it happening once, I don't think it happens that often. One thing to be aware of, some agencies will pay for your patents and some will not. It depends on the circumstances. So if you're something to think about when you're thinking about applying for this. There are restrictions on uses of funds. I'll give you an example. The National Science Foundation in phase 1, generally speaking, is not going to pay for a piece of equipment that's going to cost more than, I think, $5,000. So, there's restrictions like that. They also won't pay for patents for phase 1 for the National Science Foundation. So they most often they won't pay for marketing. I don't know of any agency that will pay for marketing to help you market your product. So, things to think about. There are restrictions on how you can use the funds. And as I mentioned before, you can submit multiple applications for the similar work. You just can't accept an award from different agencies for the same project. You can accept awards from multiple agencies for different projects, and there's some things in there, some details that you'd want to be aware of, but you can't accept an award from 2 agencies for substantially the same work. And as we said before, the odds of getting funded vary from agency to agency and year to year, but generally speaking, phase 1, you'll get about 1 in 10 proposals-ish. And an interesting piece of data that I recently heard from the National Science Foundation, their SBIR and STTR companies, about 1 in 9 of them have been successful in getting investment funding, which is not something to be overlooked. 1 in 9 is a very high ratio when it comes to investments. Think about the number of investments that angels and VCs will generally do. It's a lot. It's not 1 in 9. I know one VC that says he sees about 1,000 business plans a year. They fund 7 to 10, something like that. So if you have a 1 in 9 ratio here through the SBIR program, that's impressive. It's a great validator. Investors are going to be impressed if you have interest from the federal government. It validates your idea, it validates your technology. And the agencies, generally speaking, love it if you're able to move along the SBIR program and attract, as you go along, attract investment money. So, something to keep in mind. Here's how it works. Generally speaking, all the different agencies, there's the 11 agencies up there at the top, and they all have little tweaks and little differences, but generally speaking, the agency will issue a solicitation when they're ready to start thinking about making SBIR awards. The solicitation is a document that will list topics that they're interested in funding, the contact, the person at the agency who's involved or overseeing that particular topic, the opening and closing dates where they will allow proposals to be submitted, and instructions on how to submit those proposals. Then it's up to the small business to write the proposal and submit it in accordance with the instructions and the timing on the solicitation. So, agency puts out a solicitation, small business reads the solicitation, writes up a proposal based on the solicitation, and submits it within the window of opening and closing dates that the agency says. The agency will then evaluate the proposal. The proposals are going to be evaluated by the agency, by people at the agency. A lot of agencies also use peers, outside subject matter experts, to help them evaluate proposals. They don't just necessarily rely on their own expertise. They'll ask for outside opinions from people who are experts. Those experts are sworn to secrecy, and they're they're not allowed to disclose that they've actually read a proposal, or and they definitely can't do anything with the information that they read. So anyway, that's how they're evaluated usually. And then a decision is made as to whether or not the small business is going to get an SBIR award. If you get the award, you'll usually have to go through some kind of financial or process review. For phase one, it's usually very simple. For phase two, it's more money, so it gets a little more detailed. And if you don't get an award, the agencies I'm familiar with will all provide a debrief. They'll explain why. If your proposal is evaluated by a panel of peers and subject matter experts, you'll see what they decided. You'll have a copy of their review, and then you can, based on their feedback, you can resubmit later or choose to do something else. The process itself, again, it varies agency to agency, but we're talking about the federal government here, so it's going to take a while. 3 to 6 months is a good planning time frame for this. From the time you submit your proposal to the time you hear, think 3 to 6 months. At sbir.gov, there's a calendar. This is when the agencies have their proposals open, or their solicitations open. Department of Homeland Security up here, generally the middle of December through January is when you can submit your proposal. Health and Human Services is pretty much all year. The National Science Foundation is close to all year. They have multiple times. EPA is one time, and that's during the summer. But you can go on the website and you can see this exact calendar and find more information about each agency and what it is they're offering, what their current topics are. You're also going to be required to register. The one registration they have in common, all the agencies, is SAM. That's a system for award management. It's a federal government award system that anybody who gets a federal government award pretty much has to register in SAM. You have to be registered in that, I don't know what you call it, that system, I guess. It can take a while. It can take a couple of weeks. So if you decide you're going to go after this, it might make sense to go ahead and register in SAM. These registrations are all free. None of them cost any money. If you run across anybody who says, give me money and I'll help you register in this, my suggestion is don't do that. Instead, if you need help getting a registration on this, call your SBDC. They'll help you out, or PTAC, Procurement Technical Assistance Center. A lot of SBDCs have those working with them. It's free. They'll help you with your registration. SBA has a company registry, and then after that, they vary. National Science Foundation uses a program called FastLane. So you have to register for that. That's going away in a little bit, but right now that's what you have to do. Health and Human Services, they want you to be on ERA Commons, and you have to go to grants.gov and submit that way. So there's a number of different registration requirements that you'll need to do depending on the agency. And you're going to need to have a principal investigator. That's the person that is responsible for your proposal, the person responsible for your project. That person will need to be employed by the small business at the time of the award. Doesn't have to be employed with a small business in the proposal process. But when the award is made, the principal investigator needs to be employed by the business at that time. He or she does not have to have a PhD or an MD. You don't have, there's no requirements that they have to have some kind of educational level. All they really need to have is, and this is a quote directly from sbir.gov, they need to have appropriate expertise to oversee the project scientifically and technically. That's the real requirement for the principal investigator, that, and they have to be an employee with the small business when the award is made. So we can give you some things to think about and some tips. Do we have any questions at the moment, Emily?
Not at the moment, but if any of you have any questions, go ahead and start putting them in the chat and we'll get to those as soon as we can.
Okay, great. So we'll go through these, just some things to think about before you get involved in this, and some tips if you decide to do it. Ask yourself, is your technology innovative? Is there a market for your idea? And what stage is the technology in? It's a little, unfortunately, it's a little subjective. Each agency, each program manager that oversees the particular topic in the particular area may have different criteria that they're looking for in terms of the level of innovation, in terms of the level of technical risk, and in terms of the market opportunity. I mean, if you have a program manager for the Department of Defense who's looking for a new kind of firing pin for a tank, well, what's the market opportunity there? It's going to be less than, say, a new battery for the Department of Energy. So those things vary from agency to agency, from topic to topic, but they are a factor. There's some kind of a factor in there, whether it's a smaller factor or a larger one. So they want you to have, it's a balance. They want you to have enough data to know that the solution could work, but they don't want it to be a slam dunk already. So you can't, I mean, if you go, you're wasting your time if you're going to go in and say, hey, I'm going to develop a transporter like you see on Star Trek. If you don't have technical data that supports that, hey, this might actually work, it isn't going to fly. So you have to have there has to be a basis in reality here. And it is somewhat subjective, and you're going to have to, usually you're going to have enough to where you can generate the interest of people that are already experts in this area. You're going to have technical experts and you're going to have commercial experts that you're going to have to convince, either at the agency or on these panels that I mentioned before, where they have actual third parties do peer reviews of the proposals. So think about that before you get too far along in it. And if you have any questions about, gee, is this going to work or not, contact your SBDC. Almost all of the SBDCs in the nation will have someone who knows about SBIR, who understands the program and can help you create your proposal, help you understand what it is you're going for, and kind of guide you through it. It's a free service that, especially if you're looking to get involved here, it's worth taking on. And also think about whether or not you're willing to work on your small business at least 51% of the time, because that's a requirement for a lot of, if not all of the agencies. I'm not 100% sure if that's for all the SBIR program off the top of my head, or if it's a requirement just for some of the agencies, but be ready. So some tips. If you're going to submit a proposal, please start early. It will take longer than you think. We're talking about the federal government here, and we're talking about a lot of money. So the proposal is going to take some effort. It's going to take a lot of time, and you're going to need to get a team together. You're going to probably have to get some subcontractors in line, perhaps. It's an effort to put a proposal together. So most people I've spoken to suggest at least 10 weeks before the due date. You should start before the date you're going to submit the proposal. You should start at least 10 weeks beforehand. Doesn't hurt to start early. Start early. I've seen a lot of proposals in the day that if they're due on a Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern, all of a sudden a whole bunch of proposals start coming in. They come in electronically usually these days, and they get submitted at 4:58, 4:59, and have seen in the past I have seen proposals that because of a jam at the just before the cutoff time, because of a jam, some of them don't get in and they're submitted late. They end up getting in at 5:02, 5:05, they're submitted late and they're not considered. I've seen it happen. So try to submit it early. Start early, submit it early. Put together your team and schedule as soon as possible. You get your team together and then you say, all right, here you look at the solicitation. The solicitation requires these things. Divide it among your team. Say, this is what we're going to propose. Karen, you do this. Bill, you do that. Joe, you do this. And put together, and have a group that puts this thing together, so you don't take the whole burden on yourself. And don't be afraid to have people that are experts in these areas. Don't be afraid to have them review it and to comment. You don't have to accept their comment. You don't have to just blindly agree with their feedback and put it into your proposal if you're not comfortable with it. But it's worth it to get some feedback from somebody who is familiar with the area, because the people who are going to be reviewing it are experts. You're not going to fool them, and that's the point of this slide. You're going to have technical experts like Einstein and commercial experts like Henry Ford. Anyway, you're going to need, so remember your audience. It's going to be reviewed by people who know their stuff. So you're not going to get away with what I've heard identified as intellectual laziness. It's going to be reviewed by experts. So make sure you have enough to pique the interest of the program manager, but also to get on the side and get the excitement up with the technical reviewers and the commercial reviewers, because they're the ones that are going to make the recommendations on whether or not your proposal should be funded, and you won't fool them. If you're trying to pull something over on them, you won't fool them. And please remember the proposal guidelines. Follow the proposal guidelines. I have seen proposals get rejected, otherwise good proposals that have been rejected because they forgot a section. I've seen that happen. It's more common than you would think. Proposals have been rejected out of hand because key sections are missing. Years ago, I've known of them being rejected because of wrong font sizes and margins and silly little things like that. But the bottom line is you're asking for a lot of money. And I think the attitude that a lot of agencies have is, if you can't follow simple proposal guidelines, why would they believe you could successfully do some technical or medical educational research? Why would they entrust you with a whole bunch of money if you can't follow simple proposal guidelines? It's kind of a good question, I think. Make sure you address the topic. Generally speaking, if they're asking for solar, don't propose wind, even though you think it's a better idea. A little bit of good news here. I noticed in some of the solicitations, Department of Energy, I think in particular, they'll have a topic. And so they'll say, hey, we're looking for something very specific here, but then they'll have a little opportunity there for you to apply for something similar that addresses the same issue, but maybe not as perfectly aligned with the topic. If you've got somebody who, if they're, for instance, asking for a battery, but you're thinking of a capacitor that might do the same thing, that maybe you'd submit it under that topic under other, so that it works. But generally, if that option's not available, don't bother, because if they're going to be asking for solar, don't propose wind. If they're asking for something very specific, make sure it applies to the topic. And if you have a question, contact the program manager, give him or her a call. The ones that I've spoken to are almost universally nice, pleasant to talk to, clear, and they would love to talk to you. There's only a short window where they're not allowed. I believe it's, during the actual, when they're actually accepting proposals, I don't think they're allowed to speak to you, but beforehand, afterwards, they're many, many times very, very happy to talk to you and learn about what it is you're going to be proposing. It's worth doing. That's another tip that'll be coming up here, is to talk to the program manager or the program director for what it is you're interested in. There are a number of SBIR conferences that are going on across the nation at almost any given time. The two big ones are Tech Connect, which is part of, it's technically, the SBIR conference is part of Tech Connect, actually. And they'll have representatives from the different agencies at Tech Connect. And I believe it's done 2-3 times a year. The SBIR Roadshow is another one. That one's a little more recent. Tech Connect's been around for years. SBIR Roadshow has been a program where the different the different agencies will actually have representatives go, pre-COVID anyway, they would go to different parts of the country and talk about SBIR for a day. And you could talk to the program directors directly and say, hey, I'm thinking of doing this. What do you think? And get feedback from them. You can get some good tips, good suggestions, and some good advice when you do these things. Tech Connect costs money to attend. Don't ask me how much, because I'm not sure, but a few hundred, I'm sure, but I don't know exactly. You can find out by Googling it. And SBIR Roadshow, I'm not sure if they're doing those in person still, or again, rather. They may still all be online, but look them up. See if they've got something going on here in the near future. And check out sbir.gov. It will tell you about, it's the official SBIR website, tell you about program information, upcoming solicitations, link to agencies, and data on past awards. You can look up and see how many awards were made in California by the Department of Agriculture. You can find that out, and you can see summaries of the awards that were made, the awardee, and a paragraph about what it is they've done. These are things that the companies prepare themselves so that the SBIR people can put them out there and say, yes, we funded these guys for this amount of money, and here's what they're doing. Doesn't have to have, confidential data in or anything, but it's a little paragraph about what they're doing. And you can look that up on sbir.gov. A lot of people forget about STTR. Don't forget about STTR, especially if you're thinking about commercializing a technology that was developed at a university. That's what STTR is for. It's technology transfer. It's for programs that are, I'm sorry, there's a whole bunch of banging going right on the other side of this wall. I think they're building a small structure. I don't know. Anyway, STTR is an alternative to SBIR, and it's often overlooked. So sometimes it might be, your odds might be better to do an STTR if your idea qualifies, rather than an SBIR. And remember, the big difference for STTR to SBIR is STTR will involve the use of a research institution, a university, a national lab, some other research institution that is required to do a certain amount of work. So it might make more sense. Don't forget about it. And talk to the program officer, talk to the program director, run your ideas around to them beforehand. Because if it's not a good idea, if it's not going to qualify, they can save you a lot of time and effort and a lot of grief. But if it is something that piques their interest and something that they're interested in, they may be able to give you some insight. And you might be able to get them excited. They may be looking forward to your proposal. And if you have any questions, don't be afraid to ask them. Don't be afraid to ask them at all, because it's not going to hurt you, and it can only help. So Let's look, we've got a couple minutes. Let's look at some common reasons that proposals are rejected. There are administrative rejections and there are substantive rejections. Some of the administrative rejections, missing parts. I've seen that a lot. I've seen it recently where proposals were missing entire sections and they get rejected because they're missing the part. Non-responsive to the topic. They're proposing something that doesn't fit the criteria of what the program director or program manager is looking for. Over budget. If the program says the most you can ask for is 250,000, don't offer a program at 300, it's stay within the budget guidelines. Late submission, we talked about that, and inclusion of extras. I've seen this too, where people feel, hey, you know what? I can print out my patent, or I can print out my website, or I can throw in some marketing material and that'll help my cause. It won't help your cause. What it'll do is tick off somebody who's doing the initial evaluation of the proposal, because there's a lot of stuff that, they're going through hundreds of proposals. The National Science Foundation guy, I think he told me something like 1,000 proposals a year. They see something like that. And so you've got these people going through a lot of proposals, and all of a sudden they get somebody who's trying to sell something to them or has a lot of data that they didn't ask for. It's going to be detrimental. It's not going to help. Other common reasons for rejection is if the principal investigator or the team lacks the expertise. If you're going to propose something, make sure you have the expertise to do what it is you're proposing to do. If you don't have the expertise yet, you need to get it lined up before you submit the proposal. Make sure you have the expertise in place to do the program. They're not going to give you the money if they don't think you have people smart enough to implement the program. Unclear task plan. What is it you're going to do with the money? If you don't have a clear definition of what you're going to do with the money they give you, they're generally speaking not going to give you the cash. They want you to have enough technical detail. Now, I have seen and I have heard, I'll throw this out there, I've seen and heard people that have said, yeah, but this is research, And so I think if we do this, I think this will happen, but it may not. It's research. They recognize that. The program directors, program managers recognize that. They know this is research. And so they know that not all the questions are answered. So you're going to try some logical things. And as you go along, something may come up and show that, hey, you need to switch gears, you need to pivot, you need to do something a little different. I've never seen a program director that hasn't said, yeah, great, let's do it, let's pivot in the middle of the program. They recognize that it's research, and so not all the questions are answered, and so there may be times when you have to change direction. One thing that we've seen, incremental improvements as opposed to innovation. The best definition I've heard of that, the best is I heard someone once say that going from a flip phone to the iPhone was an innovation, but going from an iPhone 4 to an iPhone 5, that's an incremental improvement. So that's what we're talking about. They want innovation usually. They're not looking for incremental improvements usually. Too ambitious. People that don't understand the state of the art, they don't really realize that somebody's already done this before, that type of thing. Where there's poor commercial potential, or where they really don't have a plan for phase 2, they're just doing basic research and they're not really thinking about doing prototypes or bringing the thing to the commercial market. Characteristics of good proposals. It's a solution to a real problem. You have a good literature review. You know what's going on. You're at the cutting edge of the industry and you understand what the state of the art in the industry is. It's relevant to the topic. There is commercial and market potential. Well-written, well-written, well-designed, and a detailed experimental plan. those are some characteristics of some good proposals. So that's what I've got. I'm going to put this slide up there so that you can contact us. If you don't have an SBDC near you, by the way, and you want some help with an SBIR, and you don't know who to contact, go ahead and contact us, and we'll put you in touch with somebody who can help. We'll help you figure it out. But generally speaking, if you want help with SBIR or any business issue, contact your SBDC. You know, we're here to help, and that's what your tax dollars are paying for. They're paying for us to help you with your small business. Do you have any questions there, Emily?
So someone was asking when the slides will be shared, but we'll share those, pretty soon.
Yeah. As soon as I give them to Emily, and she can get them to you. Yeah. We'll also share a link to this. I think we recorded this. We'll share a link to the recording as well. Anything else?
I'm not seeing anything else in the chat.
Okay. Well, in that case, if you, according to my clock, there's about 4 or 5 minutes left. So if you took off work and told your boss you're going to be gone for an hour to go to a webinar on SBIR, you've got 4 or 5 minutes to fool around behind his or her back, because we're going to let you go early. Thank you so much for attending. Very much appreciate it. And thank you, Emily, for your help. And good luck to you.